Good morning, everyone. You can take your seats. We'll get started here in a minute. Well, good morning, and thank you for being here. My name is Julie Sarovich, and I'm the Dean of the College of Behavioral and Community Sciences. And we're pleased to have you and our community partners here with us today for this recurring FMHI symposium that we've been having now for a number of years. You know, the faculty know this, but over the summer in particular, and leading into the fall, I've been having a number of conversations with business leaders, chambers of commerce across the state, as well as state legislators. And the issue at hand, of course, is that we have a huge mental health problem here in Florida and elsewhere. When businesses get involved, that means it's hitting their bottom line. And so it's becoming very, very important to them that this be addressed. And they want it addressed at all levels. You know, we need more psychiatrists, people who can diagnose, who can prescribe some of the most serious mental illnesses that we have in our country, oftentimes leading to incarceration, et cetera, hospitalization. We need PhDs that can assess, make assessments, do therapy. The majority of the folks that do the talk therapy are our master's prepared professionals. And in this college, we have a number of them: social workers, mental health counselors, marriage and family therapists. On the undergraduate levels, we prepare behavioral health care majors, we prepare social workers. Now, on the undergrad, even beyond that, we need more. And so we've partnered with the Tampa Bay, the Crisis Center of Tampa Bay, and they are actually hiring, they're paying our undergraduates from any of our majors to come in and work with them. That's how bad the need is. Our criminology students are going in and working with the sexual assault teams. They're working in triage because the problem is so great they can't hire enough people. There's just not the talent out there. There's not the workforce out there for all kinds of reasons, and hence the conversation with the state. So it's no surprise then that we'll lean on everyone, and peer is the next level that we must address. And we know that the peer support has been around for centuries. I mean, this is probably one of the oldest, and it's primarily in addiction. So I'm very pleased that we're paying attention to that today, because we have to keep that, you know, in our, for lack of a better word, our arsenal of things that we need to call upon as we go and address mental health problems. So I welcome you all here today. I think this is going to be a great presentation. I'm looking forward, I have to leave early, but I'm looking forward to hearing what I can hear. And I want to especially thank our longtime sponsors, Dr. Cynthia and Carl Hawkins. The Hawkins have been with us from the very beginning, and their support has been just nonstop, both financial and otherwise. They've always showed up, they've been here, they get it. And that's so important for us, people that understand that there are linkages between a number of different disciplines that we need to address and need to keep in the forefront as we address the mental health crisis in our state, in our country. So again, thank you for being here, and I'm not exactly sure who I turn it over to, but thank you again.
Well, good morning, everybody.
Good morning. Morning.
We are so excited to have this colloquium on peer support and recovery. My name is Kathleen Moore, and I'm the Executive Director of the Florida Mental Health Institute, and I'm also a research professor in our Department of Mental Health Law and Policy here at USF. We've had, as the Dean mentioned, we've had these colloquiums over the years, but we've never really focused on peer support and recovery. So we're so excited that we're able to do that this year, and we have so many community partners here with us this morning, as well as a lot of our students that are in our undergraduate major in behavioral health care that are learning about peer support and recovery in their specific courses. We have a great agenda this morning, and we are going to kick it off with one of my colleagues, Dr. Kristen Kasilik. I've been honored to work with Kristen since she started several years ago. Since she began here at USF, she has been a shining light and never swayed from her dedication in her work on stigma reduction and on peer support and recovery. She's an assistant professor in the Department of Mental Health Law and Policy, as well as director of the STAR Lab, which is Stigma Action Research Lab. Some of our students may be here this morning that are in her lab. Her research agenda focuses on understanding and addressing stigma among various populations, including people living with mental illness, addiction, and people living with HIV, using community participatory research. So she really engages within the community, working collaboratively with all of you community partners. She's worked over the past decade to build an evidence base around storytelling and peer support as stigma change. Her work is grounded in data suggesting that storytelling is a critical tool for social change, as you'll see in some of her slides this morning. She's partnered with NAMI, National Association on Mental Illness, to document the power of peer support and sharing stories of lived experience. NAMI's peer-to-peer program is led by peers of people with lived experience who have mental illness and includes sharing of stories of challenges and successful recovery. I could go on about all of the work that Kristen has done over the past couple of years, but I'm gonna let her tell her story. I'm humbled to call her my friend, my colleague. Please give a warm hand to Dr. Kristen Casella.
Thank you so much, Kathy, for that introduction, and thank you for being such a wonderful mentor to me over the past 5 years here at USF. I'm Kristen Kasilik, and I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Mental Health Law and Policy. And as Kathy mentioned, I run a research lab that focuses on understanding and addressing stigma. So, if you would have asked me maybe a couple years ago whether I research peer support, I probably wouldn't have defined myself in that way. But the more and more I've done this work, the more I've come to understand that peer support and lived experience and stigma are inextricably linked. And so I'm hoping that through sharing some of the projects that I've worked with my research, that you'll be able to see that. And what's really important to understand, if you walk away from anything from this presentation, is that stigma reduction is a key outcome of peer support. So this may seem like a pretty grandiose title for a presentation, but based on the work that I've done and the work that colleagues have done, I am so honored to be in a room with all of you that are doing such amazing work in peer support. I really do truly believe that that the antidote to stigma is peer support. Okay, so this is a little excerpt from a column that I found from a woman named Claire Allen, who is a columnist for The Guardian. And why I selected this is because she talks about stigma as a poison. So stigma and discrimination can greatly exacerbate the difficulties faced by people with mental health problems. We know that. We've heard it repeatedly. Many of us have experienced it. We know that stigma is not just a word, but a toxic concoction of ignorance and fear, of prejudice and power play that continues to have a real and substantial impact on the daily experiences of thousands of people. And this occurs within families, it occurs when people are trying to seek employment, and even in accessing healthcare. So stigma is poisonous. Before I move forward, I want to define for you what I mean when I use the term stigma. So this is how we operationalize stigma in our research in STAR Lab. And we use a social cognitive model of stigma. So stigma is really a process, and there's various types of stigma too, I'm going to talk about today, that is comprised of these three constructs. The first is the stereotypes. So these are the beliefs that we hold about a stigmatized individual or group. These tend to be negative and overgeneralizations. When we believe these stereotypes, we may have an emotional response, which is the prejudice. And I'm going to give you an example, a concrete example of each of these. And then finally, the result of this process is the discrimination, which is our behavior, our unjust or unfair treatment of an individual based on their stigmatized group membership. So one type of stigma is public stigma, and that's what the general public thinks about people, feels about people, and how they behave towards people with a stigmatized identity. So I'm going to talk largely about mental illness today, but As Kathy mentioned, the work that Star Lab does also focuses on stigma around substance use and HIV, for example. So a very common stereotype about mental illness is the belief that people with mental illness are dangerous. This is a stereotype because it's an untrue overgeneralization. What we know, what the literature suggests, is that people with mental illness are actually far more likely to be the victims of crime than to perpetrate crime. But when we believe this untrue stereotype, our emotional reaction to something or someone that is dangerous is one of fear. And if we fear something or someone, we tend to avoid them. So in this example, this is an example in employment. I will not hire people with mental illness. I need to protect myself and my employees. This is incredibly damaging to people living with mental health conditions. And this same process carries out in various life domains, within social relationships, in education settings, and more. So an example of an item that we use in Star Lab to measure public stigma is something like, I personally believe that people with mental illness are dangerous. Now the type of stigma the work that we've done, we believe that peer support targets this type of stigma is called self-stigma. And that is when somebody living with a stigmatized identity is aware of the stereotypes around that identity and internalizes them. So the example here is people with mental illness are incompetent, another very common stereotype around mental illness. The prejudice or emotional reaction is I'm afraid to be labeled as incompetent, I'm incapable of obtaining a job. And then the discriminatory response in this case is the behavior towards the self, which is what we call the why try effect. Why try seeking a job? I wouldn't be able to succeed at it anyway. So an example of an item that measures self-stigma is because I have a mental illness, I'm unable to get or keep a regular job. So the question we should then be asking ourselves is how much of a problem is this for people living with mental health conditions? Is everybody impacted by self-stigma? And there was a pretty recent systematic review of the literature conducted to answer just that question, looking at the frequency, correlates, and consequences of self-stigma. And what this literature review found is that about a third of people living with a serious mental illness internalize stigma and experience those consequences, the loss of self-esteem and self-efficacy as a result. There's some evidence in the literature that this varies by culture, and also that it's perceived and experienced stigma that predict self-stigma. So why this is important is because we need to be targeting stigma at various different levels, both public and self, in order to improve outcomes for people living with mental health conditions. This systematic review concludes by making some recommendations for addressing self-stigma. And as you can see here, the topic of today's symposium is one of those major recommendations for addressing self-stigma, and that is peer support. I'll talk a tiny bit today about strategic disclosure, which is recommended by the authors of this review for people who are in the early stages of their experience with a mental health condition, have been experiencing self-stigma for a shorter amount of time, whereas cognitive restructuring is recommended for people who've been living with the impact of self-stigma for a longer period. And of course, recovery-oriented mental health services are a solution to self-stigma as well. So why should we even be targeting self-stigma? This is a recent study or systematic review that was done looking at the consequences of self-stigma for people living with mental health conditions. And as you can see across the board, these are negative associations. So people with mental illness who experience self-stigma have lower self-esteem, poorer quality of life, less social support, their levels of empowerment are lower, they have less self-efficacy or the belief that they're capable of doing things, and levels of hope, lower levels of hope. And this fits well with the way that I have been conceptualizing stigma for quite some time, which talks about stigma as being on a continuum, where one end of that continuum is stigma, and the opposite end is empowerment. So the antithesis of stigma is empowerment. So things that are associated, beliefs that are associated with empowerment include things like it's okay not to be okay. I am more like others than not, and I can lean on others. In fact, scales that measure empowerment include items that capture these types of statements. The emotions that are associated with feeling empowered are ones of compassion and empathy, and behaviors include things like talking with others, sharing your hurt, questions, and victories, and being vulnerable. Whereas the beliefs associated with stigma, as I mentioned earlier, are beliefs about unworthiness, incapable, incompetent. Emotions include fear, hopelessness, worthlessness, and anger. And the behaviors include, in this case, if you're the individual living with a mental health condition, isolating, hiding, numbing. So another way of framing this is a continuum where on one end is shame, or stigma, and the other end is hope and empowerment. So then the question becomes, how do we support hope and empowerment in order to inoculate shame and stigma, going along with our stigma as poison analogy or here. This is one of my favorite quotes, if anybody's familiar with the qualitative researcher Brene Brown. This is how she talks about shame. If you put shame in a petri dish, it needs 3 things to grow exponentially: secrecy, silence, and judgment. If you put the same amount of shame in a petri dish and douse it with empathy, it can't survive. And that is what I believe that we do with lived experience and peer support that makes it such an effective strategy for reducing stigma. So defining briefly peer support, this is a definition that I've used in some of the research that I've done and that was put forth by Larry Davidson at Yale and his colleagues. And this definition is a little bit broader. So peer support is peer-provided therapeutic help. It comes in many forms, however, all share common features. Peer support groups are comprised of individuals with a shared affiliation and a unique understanding of lived experience of mental illness, who come together to share their lived experiences and or provide help and support to one another. Now, you could, more recently, Corrigan and colleagues have defined lived experience and peer support more professional peer support specifically. So lived experience refers to people who have a history of recovery. They are peers. Individuals with lived experience who have achieved some benchmark of recovery are referred to as peer supporters. And so if you would go on to like the Florida Certification Board's website and look at the criteria for being a certified recovery peer specialist, one of those criteria is that you identify as living in recovery with your mental health condition or substance use disorder. And then peer supporters and their services have evolved from the grassroots efforts of mutual help into more formalized components within the mental health care system. And why I wanted to kind of give you those 2 definitions, one more broad and one more focused on professional peer support or certified peer support, is because there is a continuum of these helping roles. And on one end is the more formal types of support, so maybe psychiatric support, a psychiatrist. And on the other is more informal support. So at this end is naturally occurring relationships in the community, our friends. And in the middle here are kind of varying levels of peer support that are different levels of formality associated with them. So I'm going to briefly describe for you a couple of the projects we've done in Star Lab, and I would say that the projects that we have done focus on more less formal types of peer support. Whereas you're going to hear from an absolutely incredible panel after I'm done speaking. And I believe, I'd be curious if they would agree, that probably the work that they're doing focuses a little bit more on professionalized peer support. So I think there's space for all of these different ways of supporting people living with mental health conditions. So I'm going to tell you about a few projects. 3 of them are completed projects, and 2 of them are currently underway, but I wanted to share them with you because I'm very excited about them, that look at how peer support impacts stigma and supports recovery. So those of you who know me, or hopefully you're not getting sick of hearing me talk about this organization. This Is My Brave is a national nonprofit organization, And the mission of This Is My Brave is to empower individuals to put their names and faces to their true stories of recovery from mental illness in order to break down stigma and to let others know they are not alone. So, in her introduction, Kathy mentioned how important storytelling is, and This Is My Brave is a storytelling organization. In fact, I'm not sure if it doesn't say it in this version of the logo, but their hashtag is Storytelling Saves Lives. And so the Star Lab has been partnering with this organization to try to help them document the evidence behind that claim for the past 7 years now. And so the vision of This Is My Brave is to one day live in a world where we won't have to call it brave to talk openly about mental illness. We will simply call it talking. So how do they do? Whoa, I don't know what I just did. Sorry, everyone. Okay. So how do they do this? They do this through live storytelling events. So they hold these across the country. We've been really, really fortunate to be able to have 2 productions of This Is My Brave supported by Florida Mental Health Institute, the College of Behavioral and Community Sciences, and the College of the Arts, where we've brought college students, USF students, living with mental health conditions to the stage. We've given them a platform to tell their stories. So this figure on the left is just illustrating for you how many shows This Is My Brave has had across the course of its lifespan to date. So they started out in Arlington, Virginia in 2014, and this only goes up to 2022. Actually, there is a show today going on, and as I mentioned, we have done another production of This Is My Brave, so there's been 2 annual shows here at USF. And this figure on the right is illustrating for you how This Is My Brave believes that they achieve their outcomes, in this case with the cast members that take the stage and tell their stories. And through interviews with people who have told their story on a Brave stage, they determined that people were experiencing a reduction in their self-stigma or shame, increased confidence, an increased sense of purpose, a strong sense of community and support, and feeling valued. And that these outcomes are facilitated by a production team. So I led the production team for the USF productions. And when I say led, I mean I had an incredible team of people working on this production. And we were charged with upholding these 5 pillars. So social and psychological empowerment, affirming our cast members in their storytelling, reciprocity, which looks like sharing with the cast members if we too have our own lived experience with mental illness. So for those of you who were at the performance this year, you would know that I shared on stage that I live with a diagnosis of depression and anxiety, and having that reciprocity with our cast members helps them to feel more supported, authentic relationships, and then it provides an opportunity for transformation. So we've looked at the impact that this has had on the audience, and across the board in the 3 studies we've done so far with audience members, we found similar outcomes: reductions in stigma, and improvements in beliefs that people with mental illness are capable of recovery, and willingness to seek treatment. Also in a study led by Dr. Kaya Connor, who was formerly faculty here at USF, we found also that this study was focused on This Is My Brave stories from the Black community, and we found also an increase in anti-racism as a result of that storytelling. So how does this relate to self-stigma, which is what we believe peer support targets? We have done work documenting outcomes for the storytellers who take the stage. I described for you, we have 10 storytellers on average at a time on stage, so it's taking us a while to gather enough data to be able to examine these outcomes. And we're not quite there yet. I think we need like 30 people to be able to confidently look at this data, and right now we have 25. So what we've found though is I have seen a significant reduction in powerlessness, or the flip, improvements in feelings of power, and a significant increase in righteous anger, which is the energy that fuels activism. It's the belief that stigma is wrong and that we have a right to fight back against it. So we've also collected some qualitative data from our storytellers, asking what changes they've experienced in their life as a result of taking the stage, And we've seen a renewed sense of this person said they have a renewed sense of boldness for normalizing conversations, a great new group of friends, that fear has relinquished, they're no longer afraid of being judged, and that hearing other stories encouraged them to do things they didn't think they could do. Feeling more connected with others with lived experience. They've been reminded that everyone has their own story and struggles. They've found their voice, gained confidence, so that damaged self-esteem that happens as a result of self-stigma is dissipating. And their friends have been more open with them about their struggles. Have your views of yourself changed since being involved with the performance? One person said they feel more accepting of themselves and their mental illnesses, that they're more confident, and that they can be strong and brave in the face of a mental illness, and that I feel like I can be my authentic self. What more could we want to offer to people than to feel like they can be their authentic selves? And then I know I can be honest about my struggles, and that sharing them only further connects me to others. So as I mentioned, we've done some special targeted editions of This Is My Brave show, which I think is important. I was having a conversation earlier with my friend Zach about, peer support is very culturally specific, and so it can look different depending on different groups. We've done a Stories from the Black community show and also a Stories from the Akita community show. I know that there are some folks that are working with or are themselves veterans here today. And there is a upcoming show on November 9th that's virtual that you might want to take a look at, to check out. That QR code would take you to the page to register for that. If you don't have time to snap it now, don't worry, we can make sure that we get that information out to you. So consider checking that out. There's also a high school edition show, and as I mentioned, the college edition. As peer support advocates here, people who really believe in this, you might even consider producing your own show. And This Is My Brave holds regular new producer interest meetings, so you want to produce a show, and here you could go to register for one of those upcoming meetings. So I'm going to go kind of quickly through these last couple projects so that we give our panel as much time as possible. Another community partner that I have worked with since coming here to Tampa, one of the very first people I met when I moved to Tampa was Johnny Crowder, who is the founder and CEO of a program called Cope Notes. So I'm going to let him tell you quickly about what Cope Notes is.
I like to keep Cope Notes as simple as possible.
Quickly, it's not happening here. It won't let me move this.
We'll text you once a day, but you never know when we'll reach out or what we'll say. And over time, this trains your brain to default to healthier thought patterns. We'll send you psychology facts, exercises, advice, encouragement, but none of that stuff is going to change your life. Only you can do that. We're just here to help.
Okay, so Cope Notes is a text messaging intervention. It is SMS, so it's not an app. Where you receive a randomly timed text message every day that is curated by Johnny. So this is how I'm considering this to be a form of peer support. As you heard, hopefully, from Johnny, he identifies as living with multiple mental health conditions. He surprised me at our This Is My Brave show this year. So that's a picture of Johnny and me there. And we have published a research study in the Journal of Mental Health, which looks at the effectiveness of Cope Notes on users. I also, as I was putting this presentation together, noted the coolness factor here with Johnny. And my daughter does this too. This was her at her dance recital this past weekend. So if it's okay with you, Dean Surovich, the next time that we have headshots taken, okay. So what we found is, initially when I looked at the data, this is the hard part about community partnerships. You grow very fond of your community partners, but you are a scientist. And so if you don't find that anything significantly changes, or even worse, you see some harmful effects, that's hard. When I initially examined this data from Johnny's program, found nothing of significance, nothing changed. But then I started to ask myself, well, would we expect something to change for every Code Notes user in the same way? And the answer to that, at least for me, and hopefully you would agree, is no. For people who are using this program, who are currently distressed, so we use the PHQ-9 to measure this, we would expect them to have different changes than for somebody who's mentally well and using this program to maintain their wellness, so lower scores on the distress scale, and that's exactly what we found. So for people who are currently distressed, when they use Code Notes for a month in this case, they experience a reduction in symptoms of depression and in symptoms of anxiety, reduced stress, and improved emotional intelligence. They also, for people who are using this and they're currently well, they experience an increase in coping, including their overall levels of coping and problem-focused coping. Kathy mentioned I've done some work with the organization, the National Alliance on Mental Illness. In this case, this was the National Alliance on Mental Illness of in El Paso, Texas. I'm currently the vice president of the board of directors of NAMI of Hillsborough County. And we looked at how this program impacts recovery-oriented outcomes for people living with mental health conditions. And what we found is it improves recovery, specifically goal and success orientation, and the SSMIS is the self-stigma of mental illness scale. Specifically the result, the hurt that is caused by self-stigma, that loss of self-esteem and self-efficacy is impacted by participating in this program. I'm gonna skip through to the last one because I think it's the most exciting and I really don't wanna cut into our panel's time. So I've actually, our now retired beloved colleague, Tim Boaz, happened to be at Thanksgiving dinner, I think it was, with his family, and around the dinner table was the brother of his daughter's boyfriend, who happened to be a computer engineer working for an organization called Stigma App. And so Tim, of course, excitedly came to the office after Thanksgiving and said, "Kristen, you'll never guess who was at dinner," and told me about Stigma App. And my first reaction was, who in the world would name their app Stigma App? But as I've gotten to know this organization, I am so thoroughly impressed. You can see that their hashtag here is crowdsourcing hope. Kathy, will we share the slides after? Okay, so I'm not gonna play the video right now, and again, in the interest of time, but what Stigma App aims to, it's really powerful. The founder, Ariana, is an incredible speaker. You can find lots of her talks online, and that's her intro to the app. But basically how this app works is, you can see their mission here is a mission to normalize talking about mental health. So what you can do, app is totally free if you're interested in checking it out, is you can go on and when you first register to use this app, you're given the option, it's completely optional, to complete an onboarding survey. And what that survey does is it asks you to select different identities with which you identify, including things like depression, anxiety, PTSD, postpartum depression, survivor of childhood sexual abuse. There's a lot of different stigmatized identities on there. And then once you've either moved through the onboarding survey or completed it, you can ask for hope. So this is an example of somebody who's asked for hope. At the bottom there you can see maybe in this little green text it says offer hope. So I went in, I could see this person's ask for hope, and if you click, you can then offer hope. Before you offer hope, you are given a brief video that is from a licensed clinical social worker that thanks you for your willingness to offer a message of hope. Make sure you understand that this is not a replacement for therapy, and that suggests things that you might say that could be helpful to the person. And as you can see here, you can offer hope through, and ask for hope actually, through either video, audio, or text, so whatever you're comfortable with. And here's what that would look like if you were going to make an offer of hope. I receive text messages regularly from Stigma App that tells me when somebody has asked for hope that matches my identities. So I acknowledged depression, anxiety, and postpartum depression. And so anytime that somebody asks for a message of hope from somebody who's been there, I get a text message and have the opportunity to offer that to them. You can also watch stigma stories. So if you're not quite ready to make an offer or make an ask, you can watch stories that have been curated about lived experiences. So here's that way you can get a hold of that app. So what we're doing in Star Lab, I'm going to zoom through these slides so that we can get to our panel, is we have been given the entire database of all of the asks, offers, and thanks that have gone through Stigma app. And we will be qualitatively analyzing, so here's an example of what that data will look like. There's the ask, there's the offer, and there's the thanks. We're going to be qualitatively analyzing this data using Schneider's HOPE model to look at different pathways to hopeful thinking. And that model, if you know it at all, includes the idea of way power and willpower. So we'll be examining the data in that way. So my closing thoughts for you are, stigma's been well documented as one of the most significant barriers that individuals with mental illnesses and substance use disorders face to recovery. At the heart of peer support is lived experience and empathy. So research suggests that this is a potent antidote to stigma. Peer support and lived experience are absolutely key to recovery. Thank you.
I was a little nervous because Kristen had so many slides. I'm like, there's so much for her to say in such a short amount of time. So thank you for that amazing overview of all of the work. And if we have students here that are interested in working in Kristen's Star Lab, please, she'll be available after we finish today. So, as Kristen mentioned, our next section is going to be a panel. So we're going to start with a panel of agency directors from 4 agencies that do work in the area of peer support recovery, followed by a panel of peer support specialists. We are honored to have a wonderful moderator. I just want to give a little overview of Carol. It is my pleasure to introduce Carol Alowen. She's the Director of Consumer and Family Affairs at Central Florida Behavioral Health Network. And her role at Central Florida is to collaborate and assist community behavioral health stakeholders in evaluating, developing, and implementing recovery-oriented systems of care. She has over 25 years of lived experience as a family member and caregiver. She's also an advocate for individuals and loved ones diagnosed with substance use and mental health disorders. For the past 15 years, Carol has been an active ally and member of recovery peer-driven grassroots organizations, such as NAMI, Recovery Community, and other recovery community organizations. Her experiences have aided in developing strong advocacy and networking across our community. Her abilities also fuel her passion. And she recently received her Recovery Peer Support Specialist certification, and the Department of Children and Families recognizes Carol as a recovery-oriented system of care transformation change agent. It's a lot. And mental health stakeholder committees. From her experience in facilitating various evidence-based recovery peer support programs in both advocacy, recovery, wellness, and whole health, she has developed and maintains the Suncoast Region Peer Recovery Oriented System of Care Network. So a lot of you may know Carol already. And she provides her fellow peers with statewide recovery-oriented developments, training opportunities, and assists in building community recovery capital resources. It is my pleasure to have Carol be our moderator, and I'm going to have her come up and moderate our session. And I'd like to have our 4 agencies come up. We have the VA. We have Parent for Parent, NAMI Sarasota. We have the Recovery Coalition and Success for Kids and Family. Carol, I am giving it to you.
I am so excited to see all of you here. This is very special and exciting because, you know, you get to hear firsthand from the individuals that are boots on the ground, the people that are delivering the services and that have hired peer specialists. And talk about stigma, there was a little stigma around that as well in hiring peers long ago, but it's getting much better. So thank you very much for opening up the floor to understand what stigma is and how we all contribute stigma as well and how we need to stop that. So thank you. So I'm going to have each of you introduce yourselves, and then we'll go on with some questions. So
Good morning, everybody. Oh, there's another one too, nice. My name is Michael Gleva. I am the Executive Director of the Hillsborough Recovery Coalition.
Hi, I'm Nicole Schreiber. I'm a clinical psychologist by discipline, and I'm the local recovery coordinator and supervisor of our mental health peer support program.
Hello, I'm Erin McKinley. I'm the program manager for Success for Kids and Families Healthy Minds program, which is an early intervention for psychosis program for youth and young adults.
Hello, I'm Sarah Miller. I'm the Family and Peer Services Director with NAMI Sarasota and Manatee Counties, and I'll be sharing about the Parents for Parents program today.
thank you. So I'm going to try and stick with the script here because we have 35 minutes. The first question here, and you can answer in any order that you'd like. How does your agency incorporate recovery peer specialists into the overall of treatment for the individuals with mental health and substance use conditions?
So with Healthy Minds, we practice a coordinated specialty care model, which is an evidence-based model to treat young people with psychosis in the first 2 to 3 years of their symptoms displaying themselves. And so we promote shared decision-making under that model. It's a multidisciplinary team. The participants have the ability to work with a primary clinician, which is the name of our therapist's role, of course a peer specialist, we have supported education and employment specialists, medication management, lots of family education and support as well. And we really, put an emphasis on the engagement with the array of the different components of the CSC, Coordinated Specialty Care, to truly help meet the needs of the client at any time during that course of the 2 years, 2 to 3 years sometimes that we have to work with them.
So our organization's a little unique in that NAMI is a national grassroots organization, all led by people with lived experience. So everybody in our organization is a peer. So it's non-clinical. And however, we do get many referrals and have a lot of established partnerships within the community with various mental health providers and as we're covering today, even our child welfare system providers. So we are always able to partner with them for individuals who are receiving services in other spaces. Peer support can be standalone. We do have people who come to us on their own seeking peer support because we're known in the community for that, as well as we are able to be a partner with them and partner with those services that they might be receiving as well, especially in like a wraparound approach. So.
Well, the VA is gigantic and very complex. So it's one of those things where we want to make sure that any peer specialist that we bring on board feels supported and we just don't kind of like throw them to the wolves. But the first and foremost thing is bringing them on and getting them into the teams, onto the teams, integrated onto those teams. So that involves a lot of education and a lot of support of both those team members and the peer specialists. And we're really fortunate because in the VA we have a national office for peer support. So essentially they publish a VHA peer support toolkit. So essentially that's the standard model. So essentially we are, to hold to that standard, right? Which is making sure that we keep the peer specialists within their scope of practice, but at the same time, like cherish and like celebrate that special scope of practice so that they're not replacing some other, discipline and really just standing it up as its own discipline within the VA. So there's a lot of really exciting things we're doing, but we're still kind of in those beginning stages of just bringing people on and getting people familiar with what peer specialists do, but even more importantly, what they don't do. And then at the peer specialist level, it's really about supporting them and really helping them to feel empowered to go onto those teams and be that voice, and also being able to advocate for themselves and other veterans. And it's a really hard job. So that's another thing that I always try to remember for myself, is that just by being a peer specialist, everybody kind of knows, that you're an individual with lived experience. And that's a hard thing within itself, to be that beacon of hope. And I think sometimes they come to the place thinking that they have to be like perfect and have, like I was mentioned before, have all the perfect answers and things like that. So it's really more about just the power of their presence and, their unique voice.
So as a recovery community organization, we are also non-clinical. So peer support is what we do. We're really trying to shift the paradigm of how substance use treatment is offered and implemented, and kind of shift away from go do 30 days and go out on your own, or to find that connection and that resource that's ongoing beyond those 30 days, or even in the midst of them, right? So that's a lot of what we do, is offering that peer support on an outreach basis and then as a direct service basis.
Thank you.
Hopefully that answered.
Yes, thank you very much. What metrics or indicators does your agency use to measure effectiveness for recovery peer support services?
Sure, so recovery capital. I'm sorry, I'm jumping in.
Yeah.
But recovery capital and measuring that, it's an idea of what the BARC 10, I guess, is the best way to measure, or the accepted way to measure. And so it's looking at people's scores on a BARC 10 and seeing how high or low they are, and then working to improve those scores.
When I was thinking about this question, I was like, well, who's the audience? Like, what matters to that person? So I know, like, at a national level, it's about numbers and productivity and things like that. So a lot of it's about, number of peer specialists hired, what's their impact? How much are they able to penetrate onto those teams and make that change? And then at the individual level, it's really about the change that they bring about, within those teams, at the individual level with the veteran. Some other things, though, too, is we really try to, or I know at least our team, we really try to bring forth those evidence-based and evidence-informed interventions that are specific to peer specialists, and making sure that those are being implemented. So again, that implementation at that level. And also, a lot of people really value like those numbers and those research outcomes. So I would use a lot of recovery-oriented or recovery-based interventions like the RAS-DS, which helps at kind of like multiple levels, right? That's something you could communicate to those like numbers people in terms of outcomes, because that was one big thing I would just say real quickly, is a lot of times when I would introduce these types of measures, they'd say, well, can you measure change? And I'm like, yes, you can. It's just a different type of change, or a change that you're just not used to doing. It's not just about symptom change, you know what I mean? Which is a really big thing, and then it's like mind-blowing to a lot of people. So it's really helping them understand that is a valued outcome. So there's a lot of different ways, but it is really important. Like, you have to be able to show those outcomes and those improvements.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
So we work with On Track New York. That's the evidence-based program that we work with. We receive ongoing consultation with their teams. Our peer specialists have monthly care consultation with the peer specialist trainers from On Track New York, which is invaluable. And so that's something we're always looking at to, of course, keep, being able to do each year. Certainly, comes with a price, but it's, been just, and in fact, Dr. Nev Jones really helped us get started and recommended that we use the on-track model, in 2019 when the program started. So we also do participant satisfaction surveys, with On Track New York. They give us we meet with our peers for weekly supervision, which is a little bit more than we might meet with some other of our team members. And we have supervision lists that really allows us to work with them and look at them and their needs, because the role is so unique in a different way. And so trying to make sure we're really adhering to the model that On Track provides. And then just something we do fun in our office is we have a success board. And it's something we make sure that at our weekly case consultation meetings, which are all morning, which is some Tuesday mornings, the team members may not necessarily want to do it that day, but it's the whole team. The peers' voice is so important, and we're just really paying attention to the small wins, all the successes, how little or how big they may be, and that's just for us to help keep us, on track and motivated and ready to do the work for these young people.
Thank you.
Thanks. So, first thing that comes up, because we have many programs and we use a variety of different tools, sort of depending, but largely we measure what we treasure. And so I'd say we're looking for, I appreciated Kristen's illustration of that continuum of shame and empowerment and stigma and how that plays into it, because that's one of our indicators. We connect with families and understanding where they are right now in that continuum, and we use a scale of do for, do with, and cheer on. Stole from High Fidelity Wraparound, shout out. But that's a key, right? That's sustainability. When people learn how to do for themselves, that's what we're looking for. So that's something we treasure. We also want to know how much hope they've gained. We want to know how aware they are of resources in the community, how to help themselves, how is their support system, where you look at their life domains, all the things that are unique to that individual, and those are our talking points. And the Recovery Capital tool is a really helpful resource in having a lot of those conversations. But there's such a variety that we've utilized, and surveys are really important too, hearing directly from the individuals that we're serving, and is this meaningful for them? And having some qualitative space for them to share, what their outcomes are, because sometimes it can be easy for us to kind of pigeonhole people and say, this is what we're looking for in 6 months, so get your life together, and then how much do you miss by doing that? Because it doesn't mean that what you're doing isn't meaningful if they didn't reach this marker in 6 months. It could have been another drop in the bucket. So this is a thing I can go into, but I know for the sake of time, that's mine.
Thank you. The next question here is, what are some of the significant challenges that you've encountered in implementing and maintaining recovery support services? And what are your strategies to overcome some of those challenges? And you can also talk a little bit about supervision as well in this area.
Just keep going. The biggest thing that comes up for me is background screenings. And how much time do you guys have? There are opportunities as far as helping individuals to get through their exemption, but there's barriers with that as well. And it can be a very tedious process, and depending on the individual, some of the things they might need to address, even financially, that come up. So our team is very vocal about these challenges and are doing our own piece to advocate legislatively. But that's significant. And Workarounds are if you have support from your community, if you have foundations, private funders, financial sources that aren't going to mandate that. That is a workaround, or at least to give you some time while you're going through that process, because we just personally want to help people achieve that anyway, because they have that right to have that even for their own personal sake. So we want to support them, but we also don't want that to be a barrier to hiring them as well. Other challenges, I'd say, I feel like our organization is pretty fortunate being that it's peer-based, that we don't have this as much, but I hear about it a lot from other peers who are coming and looking for support from us, is making sure that they're not tokenized. We don't have token peers in clinical organizations, and that they have the proper support and aren't one among 200, So I'll pass it along because I feel like that's going to keep going.
Thank you. That's great.
So for us, one of the challenges is finding people, finding a peer specialist, because oftentimes young people who may have a strong interest in this work don't know that it's an option. They don't know that they can come and do this amazing work with people that are walking through or going through some of the things that they may have gone through in their own mental health challenges and recovery process. So word of mouth is very helpful. We also have a Healthy Transitions program, which is more of a peer-led program. And we have a couple of our peer specialists, well, several here today, so one will be on the panel. And another thing that comes up for us, especially when we're working with our youth, and we serve, again, it's about 16 to 25 is our age range. When we talk about to parents, this idea of their young one who they're newly learning may have schizophrenia or other psychotic related mental health challenges, they've never heard of a peer specialist. They don't necessarily feel comfortable with the idea of someone they don't know, maybe meeting their young one to play basketball, or some of the other things that I'll talk about later that a peer can do that's very unique. And so, what we do is we talk about that role from the very beginning. We have family meeting within about 30 to 60 days where, any team member who's able to come and meet the family and the participant just to introduce themselves and talk about their role a little bit more and give some examples of how they've helped other people. And so I don't think we've yet have somebody at the end of the day say, absolutely no, we're not gonna try that, but it takes some work to get there sometimes.
Thank you.
Well, initially, and I think it's actually still going to be an ongoing issue, is that a lot of providers are like, oh, they're here to take my job. So we have to convince them that that's not the case by, like I said, building it up as its own separate discipline with its own set of tools and interventions and things like that. But then related to that is like you said, hiring and retaining people is really, really hard. But that's kind of an epidemic, I guess, across all of mental health at this point. But then otherwise related to that is also helping them not what we call peer drift, making sure that they're staying true to their scope and doing the things that, because I think it's really hard. So I think it's easy sometimes to be like, okay, yeah, I'll do that. I'll drive people around, or I'll do these other things that sometimes programs will do with their peer specialists. And I think a lot of times that's a consequence also of them being isolated and not being connected to other peers. So that's another way to work around that, is to make sure that there's a community of peers. And that one thing that we've always said is that, supervisors will ask, well, how do I deal with this situation? I'm like, well, how would you deal with it with any other supervisee that you deal with? So that's always the solution, or always the approach. And related to that too, like we have all our social workers get together and they have like their own coalition, and all our psychologists do, so we do that with peer support too, at least in mental health, because we have that kind of impact and influence on that. So making sure that they are supervising each other and checking in with each other in terms of what they're doing, and making sure that they feel supported and otherwise are staying within that scope, which is really important. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, to echo what everybody else is saying, I think the field is somewhat misunderstood and certainly underutilized, right? And I think that goes on both ends, whether that is on the side of recoveries or if that's on the side of the agency, where a lot of people don't know that these services exist. A lot of people are maybe afraid to try them, or either think that it goes against the current model of go to traditional treatment, go to clinical treatment, and so it definitely gets underutilized. The way that we've been fighting against that, or to get it more known, is we've been hosting these roundtables and trying to get community partners all in the same room together, and trying to get everybody together to be able to say, here's what we do, and try to work together so that peer support can be utilized more in the community.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to intervene here a little bit and do a little plug for Central Florida as well. So we're on November 1st, and you're all invited. Just email me. I think you're going to send out my email address. You can just email me and I will send you the link. But on November 1st, for an hour and a half, starting at 1 o'clock, we will have Diane Harris, and she works for DCF. She's the Chief Operating Officer of that looks over the exemption process. So she's going to be giving a presentation, and then we're going to have some question and answer time. So you are welcome to come if you have questions about the exemption process. And I'd also like to speak a little bit about the supervision. And I'd like for all of you to speak about that as well. Nicole, you graciously brought that up. For those of you, and as what you had said, Sarah, is that there are individuals that are hired as a peer specialist, but they are alone. And so they don't have the support within the agency that they need. So at Central Florida Behavioral Health Network, what we do every Monday from 2 to 3, and your peers and yourself are welcome to come. You have to attest to being a peer to be in that group. But it is a support group for peers that are working as a professional in the community, and they need support themselves. So we give them an avenue for that. And that's what we do for an hour every Monday, except the third Monday of the month, where we do more of like motivational interviewing and kind of brush up on some of the skills and the learning that we have had from our own training. So when it comes to supervision, can you tell us a little bit about any challenges and also successes in supervision? I know I'm kind of like got off track here, but it's important for everyone to hear because you talked about role drift. And role drift is something that happens a lot with peers because once they get into the position, if the job description wasn't created properly, can be role drift. It would mean that sometimes a peer would take on maybe some case management opportunities or role, and that is not of a peer. That's not what we want them to do. That's not what they're trained to do. So let me just ask the panel here how you do with supervision. How is it that what successes have you had and what challenges? If you don't mind, start with successes.
Sure. First of all, thank you for that support group, or that peer support group. Is really wonderful. So as far as supervision, as far as role drift, it's really trying to keep everybody on track. Ethics and boundaries can be or get blurry in the role because it's so misunderstood. And so as far as successes, I mean, it's always wonderful when it works, right? When we're talking about supporting people and they get their first big win, or there's that first light coming on in their eyes, and that's when I get to sit down with somebody and they come in and they're really excited too. Should I move on to failures as well, or challenges as well?
Yes, go ahead.
And so, especially when we're talking about recovery, there tends to be, or there can be, ethics and boundaries issues where becoming more of a sponsor or getting too involved or kind of shifting outside of the scope of what we're actually there to do. And that can get murky, especially working for an agency. There becomes a conflict of interest of, is my first duty to the agency, is my first duty to the recovery, and trying to find the common ground there so that it's understood before even going into it, right? And so that those issues don't come up as much. Yeah.
Thank you. On the success side, I think when I think about the successes, it's when we have like a working, I guess, triad or of people, because one thing that I think is problematic or confusing is that the way we do this is that I'm their administrative supervisor, so I'm the person who's making sure that they're all, in the right place, are supported. It's really more on the technical side. Again, it's really making sure everything's standardized and things like that. I provide, clinical supervision too, but then on their teams, they have somebody else. So, sometimes if we have a conflict or something of that nature that doesn't work so well, so again, we've got to have people that we're all on the same page and they're open to understanding, like you said, like it's just kind of revolutionary to a lot of people in terms of like what does recovery look like every day. And it's interesting, we were just having, we had like yesterday was Global Peer Support Awareness Day, so we had a little kind of get together and things like that, and some of the peer specialists were saying how another piece that is kind of a challenge is that a lot of people don't know what the experience of a veteran is. I mean, a lot of our providers come in and they don't know anything about military culture, or just understanding kind of like how that experience impacts their life and that transition. And sometimes it can be confusing because it's almost like, well, do we kind of approach things like it was in the military, or do we try to do it more in terms of how, they want to live their life now out of the military? So I guess I'm not being very clear about that, but I guess it's just making sure that we're all just in a continuous dialogue about how to make things work and to improve things. It's nothing static. And one way I guess that kind of a win for me is that a lot of times supervisors, they're like, oh, I have this new person on board. Oh gosh, and how am I going to do this? And I'll say, well, good for you. I sign all their notes and I do all of this. You know what I mean? Like I'll take off a lot of that stuff off of their shoulders so they can just focus on how am I going to bring this person onto the team, or how can I really, recognize the value of this individual. And when you do that, a lot of times they're like, oh yeah, I'm happy to have a peer specialist come on board. You know what I mean? Because it's like not one more thing. You know what I mean? They just see it in terms of like being like a burden. And so removing that burden is really important. I don't know if I answered.
Thank you.
Yes.
So, the peer is part of our clinical team, and so that is, for many of our other team members who haven't worked with a peer, that's different, and it's something they may have not done before. And so really providing a lot of education to the entire team on how the role of the peer is different and should be. It's so unique. The boundaries are going to look different, and sometimes be questioned. And so talking about those things and helping people understand, how I had some examples from a different question that I didn't get to, so I'm going to slide them in here. But as challenges, so I guess the success there is when the peer feels comfortable enough. I mean, that can be very intimidating for this peer specialist, especially if they haven't worked in a professional setting in this way, to come to a staffing with 10 other team members and be the voice for the peer, or the participant, in an advocate for them in a way that, many other people at that table might not have thought about it that way. And to be honest, sometimes don't agree. And so, but everybody's, voice is welcomed. It's really important that we have open communication and collaboration, and we work really hard to do that. So that's really a success when you see the peer build that confidence, and be okay with the fact that it might not be the most popular opinion at the table, but that is what's best for that participant at that time. And so we talk a lot about boundaries and self-care and ethics in supervision. And so, you know, an example, we had a new psychiatrist who was amazing, but new to this kind of work and working in a coordinated specialty care model. And at a family meeting where the psychiatrist was there, the peers started talking about his experience with medication, and it was positive, so it was, you know, helpful and completely appropriate for him to do so because of his role in the psychiatrist chatted with me after, like, I don't know about that, you know, and I said, no, let me tell you, and he got it, you know, but it's a learning experience, so.
Thank you very much, that was good.
Okay, so to the question about the peer support supervision, I think what I'm hearing is the difference, right? Of like what makes peer support supervision different than typical supervision. And this is usually where I step on my soapbox, because I feel like, you know, how we offer supervision to peers and giving them space to sort of reflect how is this experience and what you're doing coming up for you? How are you affected by this? What space do you need? Holding just kind of like that space for them too, to make sure that they're balancing their work and their life, and be able to get into even the emotional pieces of that. Would love to see that just a standard. Just gonna throw that out there. That it's not just how we supervise peers. Would love to see what I would just say is trauma-informed supervision being done, period. So the successes of that, I feel like are, it creates a safe space, and it creates a trust with your staff when you can do that, and when you can genuinely care and be there with them and have a collaborative process of not just, you know, here's your markers, are you doing the things, and are you doing all of the things, right? So like, how can we be structured to recognize our staff as humans and allow them to have confidence in what they do because they're well supported, because they're heard, because they feel safe, all of those things, right? So those are successes in my mind. Challenges, I think like just being mindful of how is your organization structured to support that is really kind of the overarching challenge, because if your organization isn't equipped for that kind of relationship and having more space, then that in itself, I guess, is the challenge. I'm sorry, that's kind of broad, but I don't have anything else.
It's good. It makes it a little bit more difficult if a clinician is supervising a peer, would you say? So thank you very much for giving your statements about how you do it in your own organization. It's very important for everybody to know. Thank you. The next question here is, what initiatives or opportunities does your agency provide to support ongoing professional development and growth for recovery peer specialists? What strategies do you use to motivate the peer in their role?
We are really into education and training, personally. So we offer a lot of different opportunities, and so I'll just say the very first thing, right, is there is a certification process for people who want to enhance their professional development in this discipline of peer support. There is a track for this. That is, the Florida Certification Board has provided the guidelines, and so we do assist our peers in that process and making sure they get all the necessary hours. We're very big in that professional development, but that's one thing. we every time there's a training opportunity, basically, or if we're seeing something, you know, we're seeing some themes, we always have an open discussion too as part of our supervision, kind of bringing it back when we ask, you know, where are some areas that you would like to learn and grow in more? Do you feel like you need more support in these spaces? What is that? And so if we're kind of hearing, you know, I'd like to learn a little bit more about how to share my story, or I'd like to learn more about what resources there are. I mean, we can bring providers into our team meetings and do regular education that way. I want to know more about how to connect and not problem solve. We will intentionally create, you know, organizational meetings on that topic. And so we really listen to our staff. And in addition, the Central Florida Behavioral Health Network, speaking of your support groups you have, there's a learning community that we like to plug our staff into. And we host a monthly learning community in our organization as well. And we do that in a way that it's not just us, like one person, I'm giving you the information every month. It's we feel that we all have something to share and to learn from each other, so we encourage each of our staff to share something if they on a topic that they know about and want to share information. But yeah, we're just really big in it. Pursue wherever we're following lots of different organizations. We get the emails. When I see one that I like, I send it out to my staff. Hey, please attend this webinar. So those are just some things that we do.
Great, thank you. And pretty similar to what you said, one of the things that came to mind, just thinking about when peers have, you know, it's nice when they do talk about specific things of interest that they want to learn more about. We look for opportunities for that. We do have our outreach coordinator who spends a good amount of time with the peer and helps connect them to places in the community that would be a good organization or group for the peer to maybe help a participant become involved with. And so, and that, you know, the outreach piece is oftentimes new for our peer specialists as well. So it's nice that they have somebody who can really walk them through that process, because the more the peer can connect in the community, the more kind of individualized places we can connect our participants to. And then of course we have the on-track consultations very regularly. The peer is able to attend that meeting with the peer trainer of On Track by themselves, so it's a really good outlet for them in many ways. Mental health first aid and the RAP training also came to mind, and they can attend any trainings that anybody else on our team comes to, even if they feel clinical. They often, you know, are able to gain a lot of information from them as well.
Thank you. One fortunate thing about the VA is very complex, and there's also the ability to like move around. So as peer support positions open up in very different areas, people can move into those other positions. If they're like, oh, well, suicide prevention, that's really more of my passion, I want to move into that. So there's those kind of lateral, I guess you'd say, moves, but there are also promotions. You know, I think that's one thing that motivates a lot of people, right, is to say, is there promotion potential in my organization? So in VA, we have not just the peer specialist position, we also have lead positions and supervisory positions that are opening up more and more. So people, if they want to be more in a supervisory or leadership role, there's all kinds of trainings that they can access for those. And again, like everybody else, right, any other, they can access any training or any kind of opportunity that pretty much any other staff member can access. The other thing that we do is more like on an individual level. So, you know, in those conversations that I might have with them, or their other supervisors might have with them, or their colleagues, is, you know, again, what is their passion? Or, you know, when these new opportunities come up, like I was just talking to Dr. Kuzlik about, you know, honest, open, proud, you know, and there's other kind of peer support specific interventions. Coffee socials is another big one that is peer support driven. It's in the community and things like that. So another thing I would just say that we do to support the peer support position is that it's not mapped or structured like your typical, you know, clinical psychologist or clinical social worker, that it's like 80%, you know, individual psychotherapy position, you know, it's nothing like that. They don't have any kind of mapping or expectations like that, which gives them that opportunity to kind of develop these new things. Like Eddie's been working with the Office of Veteran Success to try to build something. So, you know, by structuring it that way, it gives them those kinds of opportunities. They just have to kind of access them, and we just have to make sure they know about them. Right?
Thank you so much for sharing.
So beyond the original, you know, certification and training for that, and then continuous education hours and everything, I think that offering offering room for growth within an organization is very important. As somebody who runs a small but growing organization, I think that having that foresight and that vision down the line is really important. And then beyond that, I think by default, peers are a passionate group of people, right? And so I think a lot of personal and professional growth kind of centers on the culture of an organization and allowing those people that are so passionate about certain things, right? It might not be just the role in general. It might be, hey, I'm really passionate about, serving single mothers or serving veterans or serving, these people, right? Some sort of subset of people, and giving them kind of the lateral flexibility to be able to do that and go after that and get into that. I think allows for a lot of fulfillment and a lot of, job satisfaction more than anything.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate having you as a panel today. Thank you. Let's all give them. And thank you for the great work that you do and the support to peer specialists. Thank you. Next, we're going to bring up a panel of certified recovery peer specialists. So this is our panelists, and we're going to be asking them to also introduce themselves. One of the questions I would ask is if you're certified, and if not, when you will become certified, and what agency do you work for. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Sonia Johnson, and I'm with NAMI of Sarasota and Manatee Counties with the Parents for Parents program. And I am currently working on my certification, and I should be certified within the next year.
Hello, my name is Matt Silverman. I'm currently a primary clinician over at Success for Kids and Families. But prior to that, I worked in their Healthy Transitions department as a peer specialist. And as I'm currently pursuing the clinical side of things, I do not plan on pursuing becoming a certified recovery peer specialist.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Eddie Hoffman. I work for the Department of Veterans Affairs, James A. Haley over here. In the mental health clinic, I've been a peer specialist. I've been certified for 9 years and working at this VA for 8. So I've been here a while. And like I said, I'm certified.
And thank you for your service.
Thanks, my name's Joe Wiesen. I'm employed by Code Behavioral Health, formerly known as DACO in the community. Also a board member of the Hillsborough Recovery Coalition, and Ashley in the back will tell you about the roundtable and when our next meeting is. I'm also a veteran, United States Army. I've been certified peer recovery support specialist for about 9 years also. And it's just great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So what inspired you, and whoever wants to take the mic first is welcome to, what inspired you to become a certified recovery peer specialist? And how has your personal journey influenced your approach to supporting individuals with mental health and substance use?
Yeah, this one's kind of easy for me. So I was in the military, I was in the Marine Corps, did a few deployments for Operation Iraqi Freedom and all that. I got out in 2010 and I jumped right into going to school at University of Tampa. Struggled with just, PTSD and just some other things going on in my life. And what I found was we started a student veterans organization there at the University of Tampa. We started linking up with USF's student veterans organization when they first started one. And just finding that there were other veterans around me that had been through a lot of the same things I've been through, but they were doing a lot better than I was, or they were going through some of the same things. And what I didn't realize at the time was that was peer support. Like we were supporting each other. We were kind of, helping each other through a lot of the struggles that we were having together. And as I was coming up to graduate, VA was starting the peer support program. It had passed the law, I think by President Obama, I believe at the time. It was 10 years ago. So, 2013. So I jumped on that. My wife always said I should either work for the VA or I got to work with veterans or military because that's my people, I guess. But I loved it. I jumped into it. Started off as an apprentice. Did the 6 months, and then so I've been doing this about 10 years. But it's been, that kind of what led me there is that doing it for each other, and then finding out there's actually a job where you can do that too or something. So, but I've loved it, just working with all the different community programs over the last 8 years here and 10 total. So I'll pass it on because I can talk a lot.
Thank you. Yes, and similarly to you as well, my life experience is what led me to want to become a certified recovery peer specialist. I struggled with substance use challenges and mental health challenges for the greater part of my life. And so I always felt like there was something wrong with me. And what I really needed was somebody with lived experience that could show me the way out. And so part of my story is that I went to the child welfare system. I've got quite a bit of experience with the child welfare system. And when I finally found somebody that had lived experience, that believed in me, like I just really needed somebody to believe in me. I didn't believe in me. Nobody else believed in me. And so when I found somebody that believed in me, it was a game changer. And so they helped me to navigate my recovery and get my kids back. And so for my own personal journey, I found out that my greatest pain, the things that I've been through, my greatest challenges can actually be used for the greater good, right? For a purpose. And so when I found recovery and I got stable in recovery, got my kids back, I started to do that in my personal life. I just wanted to help women that had been through the experiences that I had been through. And so I started working with women and going into different treatment centers, and that's actually how I found this role at the Parents for Parents program with NAMI. Is one of my friends from recovery told me about this job, and I just, honestly, I could not believe that there was really something out there like that, because if somebody professionally would have been in the courts with me when I was going through the child welfare system, I can't even imagine how much it would have changed everything. It took me several months to get engaged in my case plan, and so had somebody been there from the beginning, that might have been different. And so that's what inspired me to become a certified recovery peer specialist and to do this work professionally.
Thank you.
So, yes, I have also dealt with my own struggles with mental health, particularly anxiety. So, I was actually a client of the company I now work for. I started out working with a SEAS, which is a supportive employment and education specialist, to help secure employment, because I didn't really know what I was doing with my life at the time. And it was brought to my attention that this role actually exists, this peer specialist role. And I was like, wow, that's really something, I never thought that would be an option. And I thought to myself, I'm like, if I can help someone, because I feel like I'm very fortunate, like I had a supportive family and friends around me when I'm dealing with my own mental health struggles, but not everyone has that opportunity. Some people feel very alone in their struggles, and I thought to myself, if I can be there for someone, and if I can help them through that dark time in their life, and just be on their level and relate to them, I feel like I can make a huge difference in their life. So that's why I was a peer specialist.
Thank you.
So, the way I dealt with childhood sexual trauma, low self-worth, and a whole bunch of other stuff led me to a whole bunch of years of substance use. And about 22 years ago, I was happy enough to die. And that was through a process of getting into recovery, but not really feeling okay. There was something missing. And 22 years ago was a beautiful March day, sun was shining, we're in Florida. And I was delighted. I was happy that today's the day I could die. And something else happened instead. And actually I went to Jane Tatum again. And I said, please block me up. Do not let me out of here. I spent a few days there, and there were some things that changed, and I was willing to approach things different. I did have support. There were some guys that worked there for years and years and years, and they've been my friends forever. And so I re-engaged into recovery. Fast forward a few years after that, I was working jobs, whatever, we call them sobering up jobs, you know? And it's nothing too heavy because we don't do well with that. I ended up getting a job at DACO, Code Behavioral Health, it was DACO back then, through a couple of friends that had worked there. So they did not trust me with anything sharp. You know, they knew I was in recovery. They hired me because of my disastrous past. They went out on a limb. There was a couple of people in administration that said, we're gonna give this a try. And they brought me aboard, and they allowed me to use, you know, a dry erase marker and a clipboard, and when new people came in, I could get them to check off boxes. You know, it was a questionnaire, and that was my job. Something inside and my just interaction with people coming in the door seeking help for a variety of things stimulated something. And somebody was kind enough to bring up an idea of what was called then recovery support. They allowed me to get that position on a trial basis. I was the one and only peer recovery support person at the agency, and the clinical staff were afraid. They were like, careful back. You know. Well, I'm happy to say that 14 years later, and I look out here, and there's a few people here that back then were on what we called my caseload, and we did groups together, and we, you know, blood, sweat, and tears. And these people now have become certified recovery support specialists, certified peers. And there's 3 ladies out there that work with a population, and they just give it everything. I could not be prouder. Why do I stay in this? I get to see this. I get to see people heal and people come in and do the exact same thing. So I'm semi-retired now, but I retired, but I cannot get out of this. My heart is in this, so I'll do this until I'm told otherwise. Thank you.
So you retired, and yes, thank you very much. You retired, but then you joined the Hillsborough Recovery Coalition.
Yes.
Can you share your strategy for building meaningful connections and establishing trust with individuals seeking recovery support, particularly when discussing sensitive and personal information?
Yeah, it's kind of tough. On one hand, like working at the VA, you're working with veterans, so a lot of times just simply tell them that you're a veteran yourself, or you know, you got that connection with them, and that can be enough for them because they've gone through however many providers or clinicians who haven't been veterans, and that's what they're looking for, somebody that would understand kind of what they've been through. On the other hand, you work for the VA, which is the government, which a lot of us veterans don't trust. So, you know, you're kind of like, so it adds a little bit to it. And I think building that rapport, it's just listening to them. You know, a lot more listening. For some of them, they haven't been able to tell their story. They haven't been able to talk to somebody that would understand, who they were willing to even talk to. And, you know, so they might, sometimes, you know, if you're careful to warn them about oversharing and stuff like that, because it is the first time they talked, and that can be a little much, but, you know, through the strategy we've learned and all that, I mean, like I said, I've been doing this a while, so I can tell when somebody's getting there, because I know I can tell when I'm about to do it, so I try to, you know, so it's like, so I'll try and stop them from doing that, but it's really just letting them talk, listening while they're talking, thinking about my own story, where it might be beneficial to interject some what I've been through, and you know, just to show them like, hey, I get it, so you don't have, because it feels like just from sharing my, like when I was going through treatment, if somebody just understood it, I could like, okay, I don't have to talk about that as much. I don't have to talk about that. Let's get to the stuff that, like, you know, it was a lot less like sizing people up, because I know, hey, they're better and they've been through it. So I'll stick there just for the uniqueness of the VA perspective and let everyone else kind of talk about it just in general.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I don't know if we talked about what Parents for Parents is, but I feel like it's relevant. So we provide peer support to parents who are experiencing the child welfare system. And so a lot of times when I first meet a parent, they're in court. And needless to say, they've just had their children taken away. They don't trust anybody around them. And so we really try to distinguish ourselves to be a little bit different, although we are kind of a part of the system. We try to distinguish ourselves to be a little bit different than the people that they see in the courtroom. And so what usually happens is as soon as I meet them, I give them like kind of a 30-second, hey, you know, I'm Sonia, I've experienced a child welfare system before, and I made it to the other side, and we just want to help you to get through this. And so letting them know we're not here to take notes on you, we're not here to judge you, we're just here to listen and to help you navigate through this. A lot of times, like, it works. Really every time it works, you know. It's, sometimes they're a little bit resistant, but I think we just keep showing up and keep being consistent and keep listening to them. I think a lot of people just really want to be heard, and so when we do that, it builds their trust, and we do strategically share our story and our different education opportunities with parents, but really I think it's just about listening, being supportive, and being consistent.
Thank you.
Yes, I believe in the early stages, building trust is, there can be challenges. So I think a good way to work on that is by offering some self-disclosure when you begin. You know, just saying, you know, hey, I know you're struggling, I have my own struggles, and that doesn't necessarily mean your struggles are going to be the exact same as the person that you're talking to. But the important thing is that you can sit with them, listen with empathy, and just be that pillar of support for them.
Thank you.
So being the very thing I never wanted to be, which was me, is the only thing I have. And in the process of that, you know, if I can allow you, if I can find a way to allow you to be you, that's the connection. That's what I try to get done.
Thank you very much. That leads into the next question, is how do you navigate or balance between sharing your own lived experience with maintaining professional boundaries when providing support to others? And this is an important topic as well, because, you know, we just heard from the clinical side. And the clinical side is that they don't know what peers do. And so when you talk about your personal experiences in the professional world, that's a no-no. So if you could describe your experience, appreciate that. And we're educating, all these folks are educating and integrating into our physical health as well. We're one person. It doesn't end here. Go ahead.
Yes, this is, it's a great, it's going to be different for everybody, but it's definitely something that, you know, you have to be aware of, because it would be really easy to, especially like, you know, me being a veteran as well as working with veterans and stuff like that, they look at me sometimes as, he gets me, they want everything from me, like their treatment or whatever. And we've set some guidelines where, you know, some boundaries where they're not going to work with us unless they're working with clinicians and they have a goal, or they have a treatment plan, we're part of that treatment plan. So it never falls on us to provide everything for them. We're also very aware of not, like, you know, we're trying to empower them. We're not wanting them to be, you know, I've got a VA cell phone that they gave me. Well, sometimes vets call me. Sometimes vets call me a lot. And it's like being able to tell them, like, hey, this is, you know, outside of the boundaries that we set. And initially, I mean, I probably skipped this part, but initially, like, in the first meeting with them, establishing that rapport and everything else, I'm very careful to explain my role in their recovery. So if they choose to work with me, here's the role I'm going to take. And then I stick to those boundaries, and more often than not, they're okay with that. They understand, like, yeah, I forgot about that. And I'm careful to explain why that's important and all that stuff. But there has been situations where it's been difficult, but we've got very good support from you know, Dr. Schreiber, our direct supervisor, as well as just the mental health clinic, staff in general. So it's been a pretty good ride so long.
Thank you.
So when I think of this, as far as story sharing goes, as I had said before, we do strategic story sharing. And so if I'm working with a parent who's experiencing mental health challenges, well, that's probably going to be the part of my story that I share. So depending on what they're going through, and of course I don't want to share anything with them of my story that's going to scare them through what they're going through, because I experienced a child welfare system, and the child welfare system doesn't always go smoothly, right? And so I try not to share things that are going to not be effective. So I strategically share my story. And when I hear professional boundaries, what comes up for me is like personal boundaries and professional boundaries for me, right? And so from the very beginning of the relationship, when I first start working with the parent, talking to the parent, we set those ground rules from the very beginning so that they know what to expect in this relationship. I'm not here to do things for you. I'm here to do things with you and help you figure out what you want to do. We really come alongside of the parent and do with and then cheer on. We don't do things for them. So we try to set those expectations from the very beginning of the relationship, and also my own personal and professional boundaries for my own recovery, right? Because I can't help other people until I'm helping myself first. And so that means that work-home recovery balance and practicing self-care and continuing to do the things that have got me to this point, and applying that to my work life, because my recovery life has a lot to do with my work life these days. So just having those kind of boundaries, and I don't know if we've really had situations come up. We have had to like gently remind the parents that we work with where our role starts and their role starts, like that mutuality and mutual responsibility of peer support.
Thank you.
So while I believe that self-disclosure is, a crucial aspect of this process, I also think there's always the danger of, oversharing or being pushed into a situation where you personally don't feel comfortable. Like, for example, a boundary of mine is discussing religion and spirituality. That's just something I personally don't feel comfortable talking about with clients. But I think it's important to not just shut people down when they bring that up or ask you a specific question about your own spirituality. I think you can word it nicely. I think you can say, my faith is something that's very personal to me, and I don't feel like discussing it at this moment. So I think that's a way you can go about it.
Thank you.
I don't know, that's a tough one for me to answer. I'll go back to what was already said, I'll kind of reiterate it, and that is if I really, really take care of me. So if I really, keep my self-care first, that's going to include very, very specific boundaries with you. And so most of them involve everything that's already been shared in here. And I was trying to think of circumstances because I've had a lot of funny, strange things take place. I mean, I've had to tell people, put your shirt on, please. I mean, seriously, I have. I also work at St. Joe's Hospital in the emergency department, and there's a whole different set of boundaries that have to be implemented there for my safety as well as others. So I think it's an evolving thing that takes place. But again, if I keep my self-care, my recovery up front, because if I don't take care of me, I have nothing for you. But I guess the thing, or the equation might be this: you tell me what it is that you're looking for. How can I help you? And when you tell me that, there's this internal dialogue that takes place, and I can let you know what I'm comfortable doing for you. And there's a very fine boundary that happens in that. Do I practice that all the time? No. Sometimes it's more difficult than others. I have soft spots in my heart for certain people and certain circumstances where I just want to, they melt me, and I have to back myself up again and reiterate this boundary. So that was probably not an answer, but.
Thank you very much. That brings on another question as to how did you come in terms with recovery? If you could wrap it into maybe 1 or 2 words. In other words, for example, my recovery started with the family-to-family class at NAMI. because it helped me to understand that I wasn't alone and that this was a real disease. For some, it may be abstinence, and for others, it might be harm reduction. And for some of us, it's difficult to understand another recovery pathway. So I'd like to hear your recovery pathway, just a couple of words about how your recovery pathway got you to where you are today.
Sure, and I kind of mentioned it earlier, just kind of that recognizing I wasn't alone. I mean, PTSD was a big thing coming out of the military and stuff like that. You didn't want the diagnosis, so because you get kicked out, you know, stuff like that. But yeah, just finding out that other people had it and were doing well, and seeing them doing well, that was huge for me. So.
Well, my recovery pathway started from getting arrested. And so while I was in jail, actually, and I'm so grateful that I went to jail, I'm glad that all of that happened, but while I was in jail, these women would come in and they would tell their stories and they would tell me that recovery is possible. They had everything I wanted. I just could never figure out how to get the things they had. And so they told me that they would help me to get those things if I was willing to do the things that they had did. And so that's exactly what I did. And that's why lived experience is so special to me. And I will say, when I first started in this role, and maybe even a little bit before that, you know, opening up to multiple pathways of recovery was a little bit of a challenge for me. Just because I know what worked for me, and it kind of goes against the grain of everything that I was taught in recovery. But what I do know is that, you know, mental health challenges, substance use challenges are an epidemic today. You know, and I just want to see people live and be in recovery and live a self-sustaining life and be happy. And however they go about doing that, I am more than happy to be supportive of.
Thank you.
So I would say prior to my recovery, I was very closed off, and I was refusing help from people, and I felt like it was a very personal issue, and I didn't understand my anxiety at the time. So I think it was only when I realized to myself, I'm like, if I don't change, and if I don't reach out to these people in my life, like family, friends, eventually a therapist, things could go into a very dark direction. So I would say that realization is what helped me in my recovery.
Thank you.
So in 1986, I drank enough to end up in the VA hospital the first time. And back then they had a 28-day program. Actually, a lot of places had that. And you went to somewhere for 28 days, and my 28 days came up, and I waited. It was military, you know. I was waiting for my orders, and I went to this counselor, and I'm like, you know, what are my next orders? And he said, I don't know, go to AA. So I did. And I kept going. Whether I drank again or not, I kept going. As far as multiple pathways, so back then, you know, it was very, I mean, people were old then. People were my age then when I was going. So that's bad. But there was, you know, it was like, there was the A's. There was a A for this, an A for that, an A for that. And so that's what I cut my teeth on. That's what I was groomed on. Since now working in this field, I have seen enough people die. I've seen enough moms and dads bawl their eyes out over the loss of someone. I had a lady who was early in recovery. Her mother was not. She gave her mother $20, so her mother would not go out and prostitute that day. And it was the $20 that killed her mom. You know, she copped out that day and she died. And to see her shame and guilt. And so I've blown the lid off of, it's got to be done this way. I don't care. You tell me what you want, and we're gonna go from there. So I've had to really open my mind to MAT and everything else in between. So.
Thank you, Joe. I appreciate that. It is difficult because we come with our own values and we come with our own thoughts and how we go into recovery or our way of recovery. Our reduction was a hard one to swallow because my first husband had passed at the age of 25 of an overdose, and he was on methadone programs. So when I was learning more about harm reduction, I was like, no, that's not good. But it is up to us, and as peers, the main purpose of a peer is to come with no judgment. And so, thank you for coming with no judgment. That helps to save many lives and provide hope. The next question is overcoming challenges. In your experience, what is a common challenge of individuals that you're faced with that have mental health, substance use conditions in the recovery process? In other words, how do you help them overcome these challenges through the role of a recovery peer specialist? And if you can, describe some of the tools that you use, the evidence-based programs, whether it be RAC or another program. Thank you.
I think some of the challenges, I've spoken on some that are kind of unique to the veteran side of it, where it's a lot of them just want to share their stories with another veteran, or they don't maybe trust a clinician or whatever it is. So sometimes overcoming that can be, I can overcome it with them, but getting them to be comfortable speaking to a clinician, that might be something that we work on. And just using my own story, sharing my own experiences with therapy and things like that, working with others, you know, my experience of, you know, in school. There's a lot I did to get over some of that, some of my own boundaries, I guess, I had, or my own hang-ups I had on working with certain types of people or whatever it is. I use a lot of smart goal setting and like mindfulness, like the stuff I'm able to use and things like that. It's just smart goal setting with me is like a really big one. Just because, like he was saying, you know, you get your orders. You know, the military is very strict. Like they tell you what you're gonna do. So when you get out, you're kind of like programmed that way. That somebody's going to give you your orders or whatever, and then you've got to work through that. No, I got to set my own goals. I need to, you know, I'm my own person now. I can set my own goals, and then it's about how to actually, you know, accomplish those goals. So it's not just your little piece of those that mission. That's all you have to worry about anymore. Now it's everything, and you've got to figure out the steps. And, you know, if you're familiar with smart goal setting, it's a very good way of kind of making some sense of that. So, you know, using that and other things, challenges. Another unique VA thing is a lot of times having a diagnosis can be attached to a monetary value where you're getting compensation. So I can't tell you how many times I've had a veteran ask me how will this affect my disability, and that's a challenge. So you're working with somebody that you know could benefit from this, or at least, you know, from your own experience, they could benefit from this, but they're more worried about the monetary side of it. That's a huge thing to get by, and typically it's after they've gone through whatever was coming their way. That's happened now. Now they're like, I don't care about the money, and let's get some help. But it's hard to watch that because you're like, dang, you just, you know. But having been through my own challenges, I understand it. But it's so it can be a challenge that's, you know, that's maybe specific to the VA, and I'll let others talk about those.
Thank you.
I would say lack of understanding of the system, lack of resources, lack of trust, and stigma. And so sometimes it's challenging because the parents that I work with that are coming into the system, they have 12 months to work through their case plan to get their kids back, and it's very outcome driven. And these people come into their life and they tell them the things that they need to do, the tasks that they need to do to be good enough, right, to get their kids back. And so these are just people that have entered into this system, not voluntarily, and they don't understand what's going on. They don't understand who they're supposed to call or what they're supposed to do or what court hearing is next. So they don't understand the system that they are working through, and that's one of the things that we help them with the Parents for Parents program. And then the other thing too is they don't know, it's not they don't know, they are afraid to use their voice because having your children taken away, there is such a stigma that comes with that. you are a bad parent, you know, or that's how they feel. And so speaking up for themselves is very, very difficult for them. And so that's another thing that we work with them on, right? We practice the tools of recovery capital and some of the principles of wraparound and the SMART goals as well. And we do some role playing with them so that they can advocate for themselves when they go to court. If they hear something that they want to speak up for, we try to teach them to do that. We don't do it for them, but we practice with them so that they could do it for themselves. And then the other thing that is a huge challenge is housing. Everybody needs housing. Nobody can change their life without a stable and safe place to be, especially when many of these families that come in because of the trauma that they have been through. And so without a safe and stable home or place for them to do that healing work, I mean, they might achieve the outcomes, but until we look at the root of the problem, we're not really getting anywhere, you know? And so I would say that's another huge thing, is just the lack of resources, advocacy, and understanding of the system.
Thank you.
So when you're working with younger people, particularly teenagers, there is a desperate need to fit in with your peers, with society in general. And so what I want to talk about is what has been spoken about before, stigma. There's a lot of stigma that comes with mental illness, even the common mental illness like depression, anxiety. And what I believe to be the most significant stigma is the stigma from within. Because you can remove yourself from toxic people in your life, but ultimately you follow yourself wherever you go. So I think working on accepting yourself, and through work as a peer, you can be there with that person and share your lived experience and normalize that to help decrease that stigma. So yeah, I think that's very important. And as for different methods, we utilize wraparound services over at Success for Kids and Families. And personally, I have also utilized SMART goals in my work with clients, because some clients, they want something very concrete. You know, they want goals to be set and to have something to strive towards. So that can be a very effective tool.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd say probably the toughest area that I run into, or most challenging, is the trifecta, which would be high mental health needs, substance abuse, homelessness, and I'll throw in medical difficulties too. Because when you're living in the street, you're living in the car, you're not at your best medically. If you're living in the street, if you're living in your car, you're not keeping your psych medication, or you're not keeping your appointments. You're not going to show up. You don't show up for substance abuse treatment, outpatient-wise. You know, if they say, oh, it's free, don't worry about it. You don't show up. You can't. Your priorities are extremely different. It is totally survival mode. There's a breakdown in not only our area, I'm sure this is nationwide as well as statewide. There's no easy fix for it. One of the things with the Hillsborough Recovery Coalition is we're bringing everybody to the table. Please come sit down, because we got to talk about this. We all provide services. We do a great job at it, but there's a big area that falls through the cracks. And until we can do something about that, which would be some type of secure housing, there's tent cities, there's Tampa Hope, there's various things out there, but they're saturated. So we have someone in crisis, and the last thing I do want to talk about too is this younger population, which includes my grandchildren, by the way. They've taught me so much, because what they're doing, they saw things that we never saw. And I don't care if you're 40, it's a different world for them right now. They have special needs because they have seen things, their friends have been killed, their best friends have committed suicide. It's very, very challenging. It's very, very different. It's got its own uniqueness to it. With that said, what I see with a lot of the population in crisis is, you know, they're told, you're young, I was young too. And it's like, what an insult that is to somebody. They are way smarter than I ever was. They're way smarter than if you're 40, smarter than you were back then. You know, your society was different than it is a new thing. So we gotta pay attention to this, and I wanna give all the support I can to that population. I love my grandchildren dearly. The best thing I can do for them is listen for them. You know, they get to tell me what the needs are. And so not only do I listen, I mean, I gotta pay attention and like get on board with that. So.
Thank you. We have one last question, and then we're going to break back to you. And, you know, at the beginning of this session, we talked a little bit about the difficulties of putting a peer into different settings. And so we have the hospital bridge program, where the individual meets the individual who either is overdosing or overdosed and came back. And we have family, navigation, we have different settings that the individuals are now working in. So could you tell us a little bit about providing examples of successes in your collaboration, working with clinicians, doctors?
Yeah, there's one I always come back to, or I always think about, because it happened early on, and it was like, if I wasn't totally bought into peer support and kind of the importance and everything, this one definitely got me. It was probably like my first year working in Tampa. So I worked in Sarasota for a couple of years by this point, but it was starting a program and all that. But I walked outside my office and I had this bank of windows, and I'm right next to the PTSD program or trauma recovery program. There's the substance use disorder service on the other hallway. And I saw this veteran out the window, and he was drinking beer in the parking lot. Or I assume he was a veteran. He was in a Jeep with tags that identified him as a veteran. So, but like a couple of providers were like, hey, we need to talk to the VA police and let them know that he's out there drinking in the parking lot. And then, but then some of the other providers are like, hey, Eddie, would you go talk to him, you know, because he doesn't want to talk to us or whatever. And I was just like, and I'd seen him, and I was like, I had asked him, like, you want me to go talk to him? Like, yeah. So I go out there and I just introduce myself. I start talking to him. He's just having a rough time. He was kicked out of his house. He was spending the night in the parking lot, so we had some beers and all this other stuff. And I was able to like just kind of share a little bit of my story, bring him in, and then working with PTSD program, they made a spot for the director of the program to see him real quick, and then they got him in the SUDS, and then they got him in like so. And then I worked with them throughout all that stuff, and then you know years later, he's down at Riverview Clinic, and I see him down there. And he's like in school to be, he's going to psychology, like getting his doctorate in psychology or something. And I'm just like, man, that's pretty cool. Because you don't always, and I could probably speak for everybody, you don't always get to see like the impact that you have on people. So it's like in that moment that you, and anybody can do this, in that moment that you have with somebody, like, you know, try to have an impact on their life, you know, or just be nice. That's, be a human, you know, whatever it is, like, because, I mean, yeah, I was doing my job, but I got it. Like, I understood kind of what he was going through. So, just being able to not have the police involved and take care of, you know, in that way, like that was a huge eye-opening thing to me. That like, hey, this thing might work. So, and so there's been a lot of situations like that, but that one always sticks with me.
Thank you.
So I would say that we don't really work with clinicians because we are all a peer-led mental health organization. But we do, however, work alongside of system professionals or service providers. And I think the greatest opportunity that I've seen has been like the culture change within the system since we've started coming in there. And so we go in there, we share our story in their pre-service training is what it's called. So when there's new case managers that are going to be working with families, they have to go through training. And so we go into that training every time there's a new one, and we share our story, we talk about the program. And then we also do the in-service training, so for the case managers who are already working. And we do the same thing. And so I think that the system advocacy and the culture change is like the greatest collaboration that I've seen, most impactful. And so we also work with the foster parents who are doing in-service training and pre-service training, and we started working with the attorneys from DCF to do trauma-informed language in the courtroom. And really, that's what it all comes down to, right? Providing trauma-informed cares for the family that they are working with. And one thing that you said that's true, like we don't necessarily see the impact that we're making, or even especially in the long term. And so I think for me, like just recently we started a parent advisory council, and hearing the parents share about how supported they felt. Like they don't tell us that, and that's okay, I don't need to know that. But just hearing some feedback from them on how they felt supported and how they felt heard, to me, makes it all worth it.
Thank you.
So one of my first clients when I started working in the Healthy Transitions program at S4KF, he was about to lose his housing. He had a family, he had a wife and a little baby boy. And I thought to myself, what can I do? I feel somewhat powerless in this circumstance because I was very new. I didn't have experience working with a team at that point, but I did get to work with the supportive employment and education specialist I mentioned earlier, and we worked to get this guy housing. And it was a long process, and there were many points in that process where I personally felt like, I don't know how this is going to work. Is this family going to be homeless? And I guess what I learned in that experience is to just, when you have those doubts, just keep going forward. Rely and lean on your team members when you need to. That is so important to do. When you start to lose faith, and to remind yourself that there are people with you, and if you persist, good things will happen.
Thank you.
It's been a road. Again, when I started at DACO 14 years ago and whatever, and the staff, they were nice. It was like a pat on the head though. To go from that to little by little, I don't even know how it happened, I guess, just being there, being present. Then a few years later, they're like calling me into staffings, client consultations, and then next thing I know, they're like, we need to hire more, what do you think? And they had me interviewing other people to come work as peers. So here we are now, and there's like 11, I think, employed just at Cove. That in itself, that was kind of, it's interesting, and I say here today, welcome back. At the hospital, that was like a learning curve also, because we came in there as peers, and a lot of the nurses and physicians in the emergency department were like, who are you, what do you think you're gonna do here? And 2 years later, I got psychiatrists, psychologists, MDs, nursing like crazy, and social work saying, hey guys, can you see this person? What do we do? Et cetera, et cetera. But it goes both ways, which is also this. We're not magicians, and we don't cure people, we don't heal people, we're not a magic bullet, we're not a dumping ground for folks that you don't know what to do with. And so it's been this give and take process of dealing with social work and saying, well, yes, this person wants recovery, but you need to take care of their medical, their housing, et cetera, and then we can talk about this other part. So, it's all a work in progress for all of us, you guys here. If you're students, please get into this. Get into it. Yes. I'm gonna die in 13 years, so.
Thank you. Let's give a big hand. Just one more thing. If you are a peer, just put your hand up. Thank you so much. We want to thank you all for the great work that you do. Thank you.
Carol, I just also want to thank you for, it's hard to moderate. If you guys can stay up there, do you mind?
Oh, okay.
We're going to do a short Q&A. Carol, thank you. It's hard to moderate. You did a great job with moderating questions. Both panels were awesome. Kristen, you were awesome. We're gonna have a short Q&A. we can probably go on for several hours with all of the rich information that we have. I do want to just share that for our FMHI annual report, we usually mirror what we do with our colloquium. So we have outside on the table our annual report that's focused on peer support and recovery and behavioral health. So please take a copy. We also have electronic copies as well. I also would like to honor one of our former colleagues. Jim Winarski is in the audience today. He has a master's in social work, and he joined our USF team within our Department of Mental Health Law Policy in 2004. And he retired shortly before COVID. So we really didn't have a chance to honor him. He has provided technical assistance and training in the area of behavioral health with a special focus on recovery-oriented programs for persons with serious mental illness and the VA and for homeless populations. He also was one of the instrumental folks within our undergraduate major in behavioral health care who developed several courses, one on recovery-oriented mental health. He also developed a tool to support the implementation of recovery-oriented mental health services. That's been used as a guiding framework, so some of your agencies might have used that tool to support our system of care. He's also, as I said, led other initiatives in the area of homelessness, co-occurring disorders, and veterans populations. Jim, we have really missed you. We haven't really had an opportunity to share what you've done in the past. This is your people, so we wanted to honor you with an award.
Oh,
It's heavy.
It is. Well, wonderful. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Well, it's quite an honor. You know, I have to just share, listening to the folks up here and hearing the peers, that it's actually hard to measure just how profound an effect peer service has, because it's not only on the clinical level, which is what we focused on here. This really goes throughout the whole system of care that you need. You know, something I always talk about is that for recovery to happen, the one fundamental thing you have to have, if you don't have it, it's not going to happen, is that the person has to be behind the wheel. If they don't get behind the wheel, everything else really doesn't matter. That's the fundamental piece. That applies all the way when we look at policymakers, administrators, supervisors, the entire system of care. Infusing peers into that process is really fundamental to getting behind that wheel in a way that can have profound transformational change. And it really is. I mean, back in, it was actually 2004 when the new Freedom Commission came out. It was a big federal policy that for the first time the federal government actually recognized recovery as a possibility for people with serious mental illnesses. That was revolutionary at the time. I think we've come a long way. But that's basically the driver. It's the fundamental driver to what can happen, and peers can just have it's profoundly transformational to everybody involved. And I'm sure something you guys didn't really get to speak to is how much that's affected your own process of recovery. Being a peer and what that's done for you. Because I know just an experience that I've had with over the years, I've heard incredible stories of what it's done for people who participated. So, but anyway, it was a joy, just a joy to be part of this community over the years and to be working on this, and I really appreciate it. So anyway, thank you.
We can open it up to the audience if we have any questions from the audience. Yes.
You guys hear me okay?
Do you want here's the mic.
Okay. So I know you guys are all like different agencies, but do you guys ever find yourselves working like together on certain cases or with like certain different populations?
So I work for the VA, but so we stick a lot with strictly veterans a lot of times, maybe their spouse, stuff like that. So Yeah, we absolutely refer people. I try to refer people out to anyone that'll work with families. I mean, doing things like this, I get to meet other. That's part of it too, is that outreach, you know, to collaborate and all that. Before, I feel like before COVID, it was like we had a pretty good network going, and then COVID hit. A lot of things went under. You know, a lot of nonprofits never came back. Some of the stuff, you know. So it's like doing this helps rebuild that. But yeah, I've worked with DACO before, but like specifically like with some of the others, maybe not, but definitely with some of the ones back here, you know.
Yeah, I can just share that I've probably seen you guys in a few meetings before, but what I can tell you is just because we all have shared experiences in life that have similarities, there's already a unity between us. And so I think that's one thing that's really cool about peer support, is that we all have this connection. And so with the Parents for Parents program, we're still kind of new, I would say. We've really only been working with parents for almost a year now, so we're kind of forging the way. But we have been working with, like, there's some FIT peers in Sarasota that work with other families that are experiencing child welfare, and we do the call on Monday with other peers. So we are all connected, but hopefully there will be more connections to come.
Yes, well, I haven't had too much experience with inter-organization collaboration. I do know that we at Success for Kids and Families have collaborated with NAMI in the past, and I think that's great.
I'm really not a social butterfly, although I've been told that a lot. So to answer your question, listen, it's like this: I want to know you, and I want to know you, and I want to know you, because if she is in need, or you have someone in need, because people die. You know, people take their life, they overdose, they just use drugs every day and self-medicate and live in pain and shame and all this shit. No. So I collaborate. The Hillsborough Recovery Coalition, it's called a round table. The reason it's a round table is we want anybody and everybody, and it's not a profit thing, it's not to be showy, it's that, look, we're here to help people. And if this guy can only relate with this guy, then let's do that. So yes, heavily. And I pass out business cards, send an email, send a whatever. I don't answer my phone after 5 p.m. Done. But yeah, we want liaisons. This is a community issue. It's a community solution. So yes, we have to.
Thank you all for your time.
Thank you.
Other questions? Comments from and this could be for any of the other panel members or for Dr. Koselik as well. It was such a wonderful turnout that we had, especially with our students. We are really lucky that we have such a great connection, I think, with our community and with our with what we're doing at the university. So we're really looking forward. I think I talked to Carol earlier about this is not the end of this conversation. We want to continue this conversation because we could probably talk another couple hours about recovery and peer support services. So I think we're going to continue and have another realm of this probably in the spring. We still have a lot of our tables and folks back there. So again, we want to open this up to conversation. We know that some of us are going to be going up to lunch, but you are welcome to kind of stay and share and get to know one another. As we said, we want to interconnect, and that's part of this whole thing, right? And your stories and what everybody has said is just beautiful, and it's really about getting to know the person. Just being nice and looking somebody in the eye with no judgment, right? So anyway, let's give a big hand for everybody.